All right. Hello, my name is Katie Hughes, and this is the introductory meeting / salon of Womenhouse. Womenhouse is a modern 2021 redo / expounding upon the original Womanhouse project from CalArts in 1970, and we are envisioning it to be an intersectional and inclusive space for women, artists, designers, and creatives of all stripes. So this is us, and I'd like Candace and McKenna to introduce themselves, and we're gonna go from there.
Okay, cool. Hi, my name's Candace Navi. I'm an MFA 2 in graphic design at CalArts, so that means this is my third year of school. What did you want us to say again, Katie?
Just talk a little bit about how your practice has evolved and how being a woman has intersected with kind of the things that you care about and think about in design.
For sure. Yeah, so I would describe my practice as being really sentimental, actually. And I think that definitely could and probably does relate back to being a woman. I feel thankfully infinitely more comfortable going there in terms of sentimentality or nostalgia or just exploring my feelings in my work. Probably just as a result of that, like as a woman feeling comfortable and like wanting to share those feelings and feeling like art and design are good vehicles for exploring those ideas and feelings that I otherwise don't really get a chance to explore in other parts of my life. I think a lot about like trauma and like immigration experiences as well. And like religion, specifically Judaism, in my work. And I think as a woman, like it's funny because at the beginning of my design career, I worked in tech startups, and like I was so dead set on like being androgynous and like trying to fit into this like the idea of tech that I had, and like kind of the idea tech had of me, like trying to be almost as unfeminine as possible, to now where I like making really girly stuff. And I'm just like, yeah, like I'm gonna add some sparkles, I'm gonna use color pink, like fuck it, this is who I am. So it's been interesting to watch my own arc and my own relationship with being a woman, specifically a woman designer, change. Like I remember last year one of my classmates said like, I could tell a woman made this. And I was just like, first I was like, do I want that to be true? But now I'm like, hell yeah, like that's cool.
Yeah. And I have a lot of thoughts on that too that we can talk about afterwards.
Yeah, perfect.
McKenna?
Hi, I'm McKenna Jansen, and I'm in MFA 1. I'm also in the 3-year program, so this is my second year at CalArts. And similar to Candace, I feel like a lot of my work is pretty personal and vulnerable and sensitive, and those are all qualities that I love about myself and I love about women in general. And I think it's like no coincidence that like I'm a female designer and that's what my work is about. I also just have this like need almost, I'm kind of like possessed by this idea of like intentionality and purpose, and like my work has to do something good for the world, and it's almost in like a caretaking sense. And I think that definitely stems from like some deeply ingrained like motherhood like within women, and how we are the caretakers and we do heal, and it's very different from a male perspective in design where they would view it more as like conquering the next like unknown terrain, like this like manifest destiny approach to design that's like let's like steal the uncharted territory and make it my own, versus like I am fully in the mindset of like, whoa, we've like ruined the world around us, like how are we going to use design to like heal that and make it better. So I think all of those ideas are like very true to my core as a woman designer.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And Yeah, to reiterate, I'm Katie Hughes. I'm a first year, what we call a PMFA in the 3-year program at CalArts in graphic design. And I agree with everything that both of you have talked about. And I think that's actually the first thing I want to discuss generally is, I guess like Candace, I've been thinking a lot about the things that I design and whether you could tell they were made by a woman and whether to lean into that or not. And I think that's, a hard decision when you're making work. You're like, well, what do I want to be remembered for? And do I really want to reify stereotypes about the gender binary, And I think there are beautiful things to appreciate about being a woman and having, this nurturing aspect that has either been placed on us by society or comes naturally to us because of, nature and biology. And I think those are really complex issues that I am thinking about and grappling with on a daily basis. And I think ultimately it's up to every designer to make those decisions for his or herself or their self. But to also be aware that like, as we go forward and talk about these things, it's important to have these discussions and be aware of where these stereotypes come from or why it is, or, what is in the zeitgeist that is causing, modern design to be so much about like what is new and unconquered, and how do we bring in other narratives and perspectives about other things that are really important in design too. So that's definitely like a great starting off point for, the entirety of this project of Womenhouse, which is supposed to be about plurality and about a variety of different experiences and viewpoints on feminism and equality and different voices in the art world. So yeah. I think that's all really exciting.
Agreed.
So I guess I want to plug like a couple minutes about the original Womanhouse and what I wanted to talk about this project going forward. So the original Womanhouse was it was part of the CalArts Feminist Art Program that took place in 1970, and it was started by Judy Chicago and Miriam Shapiro, and it was part of an overarching series of like feminist art talks basically in classes and salons. And the original Womanhouse was an exhibition space that was open for about 2 months. And the first day it was only open to women, and it got just an incredible amount of response from people all over LA. And there's a lot of like, kind of spicy stuff in the 1970s. And a lot of the projects that were exhibited were about issues that were affecting women at the time. And it's so interesting to go back and read about them, because about half of them seem really dated and really pertinent to the 70s, and the other half seems to be the same conversations we're having over and over and over. And I think we as designers can kind of see that when we look at the archives of different like posters and messages around feminism and around women's rights, somehow it feels that we've come really far in 2021, and on the other end, it feels like nothing has changed in the last several decades. And I think it's important to preserve that history and talk about it and showcase it, but also to kind of think about moving forward and to think about us as the next generation of designers and educators. We're all students, but I think all three of us really want to be teachers and are TAs and care a lot about forming these kinds of thoughts in younger and future generations. So I was wondering if you guys had kind of vibes on that stuff.
McKenna, I went first last time.
Well, I guess, yeah, that is something that's really important to me, because I know I do want to be a teacher. And when you were talking about progress, like in some ways in my lifetime, I do feel really grateful that I didn't feel like I couldn't do what I wanted to do. So like there has been some progress. Like I didn't think that like I couldn't go to grad school for graphic design because I was a woman. And I'm super like, yes, that's great. But it doesn't mean that there's not more work to be done. And I just hope that like by the time I'm an educator, maybe we won't have people making comments like what was said to Candace, like, oh, I can tell like a woman made that or something, like I think the next step is now it's a little more even, where like women feel like we can be a part of the field, but now the next step is like changing the goals of the field so they're not just male dominated goals.
I really love that, like reconfiguring like bigger ideas and goals that we have as a discipline. That's amazing. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm into it. It starts here.
I think it's worth bringing up too, because I struggle with this in terms of thinking about egalitarianism. Like, is it even worth talking about design as women, right? Like, you know, do we reify that language by like do we end up redrawing those barriers when we have conversations like this? And the reason I think it's important that we do that anyways, or risk that anyways, is like, as I'm reading more about graphic design as a field, and it's like, you know, only really existed in its current form for the last 100 or so years, there were so many, even recently, like there were so many clubs that were just all men, you know, and like women, I think it's easy for us to forget that only a generation or so ago, you know, women did feel like, oh, I can't go to grad school, or it's revolutionary for me to go to grad school and be part of this all boys club of the design world or the art world or the poetry world or whatever, which I think is particularly damning considering the arts have always been considered so sentimental and so relegated to the realm of women as kind of a derogatory function. And yet we find ourselves in these spaces, and there are still remnants of very heavily male dominated goals, and like especially in the upper echelons, like, you know, women make up, I think, the majority of students in graphic design and art across the world, but we don't get hired at the same rates. And those are real statistics that make these conversations important to have.
We're not hired at the same rates, and we're also not decision makers. Like, if you look at any school's faculty, like, it does not reflect the student body.
Right.
At least not yet.
And the thing at companies also.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I think I like what you said about design, and like how, you know, the shift is to be less male dominated is new. And it makes me think about like craft and how like design versus craft, like what is the real difference? Like, should there be one? And like art versus craft, like basically craft was something that was labeled as work that women made. Like there wasn't really any reason it needed to be separate from design or art other than the fact that women made it. Like that was usually a big division. So what makes it, I don't know. I'm just thinking about like what makes something design versus a craft, because you could argue design is a craft. It's a trade.
Yeah,
it's a guild. It's a
right
tool. And I think it's worth mentioning that Miriam Shapiro, who started or like developed the Feminist Art Program at CalArts that was in place till 1976, was a craft person. She was incredibly caught up in the pattern making movement, and she brought craft work into her paintings and into her fine art to kind of blur those lines of this kind of like and she did that because of its association with being relegated to womanhood and femininity. It wasn't just because she loved craft making. It was a political statement. And I think we often find our work inextricably bound up with political issues just by nature. And part of that is going to CalArts, right? So it's kind of inescapable to be a modern artist or an artist generally without commenting on what's going on at the time.
Very true. And I think it seeps into our work in ways that we're not even always conscious of or aware of. Definitely feel that now more than ever, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's hard to prioritize like a hypothetical prompt about like some sort of poster that doesn't feel like it connects the real world when like the real world is like falling apart. So yeah, it is like seeping into it. And I think that's a good thing. Like I think our work that we make in grad school should be interacting and dealing with real problems and trying to make some sort of like statement on it that matters.
Absolutely. And not that that's just something that's relegated to women, but I definitely think kind of being in touch emotionally with what we're feeling about the world and wanting to make work about that is something that I think is valuable and important to do, and something that kind of makes, especially like being in grad school for graphic design, really important, because more than anything we are message makers more than just image makers, right? We're constantly being concerned with the work we're producing and how it affects the world around us. It's not just that we're taking things in, it's that we're processing it, and it's a conversation with the world.
Very true. But I also think it's important to like think about what the world even is, right? Like there's the actual like literal world, and then there's like our inner worlds too.
Right.
Like I think about probably that more than the external world, to be honest. I just thinking about like the experiences I've had. Like sometimes I almost use grad school as an excuse not to engage with things that are going on. And I'm just like, there's so many things I want to address about myself and like work through myself through my work. And I think bringing it back to being a woman and being women here, like those are the stories that I feel like no one, like less people are familiar with or hear about. So it feels empowering to address them.
Yeah. Like my work is constantly coming back to the self and myself in particular. And just like we were talking before this, like I think about the male gaze a lot in my work, and I'm interested in cinema and photography and the ways in which women generally are portrayed, but also how that affects my daily experience as a woman out in the world, and how I'm, like you said, kind of interacting with the outside world in LA and walking down the street, but also like, you know, like grad school is, especially art school, is incredibly emotionally impactful, and you know, every class affects me deeply emotionally, and I think a lot of people um, probably don't think about that or realize that as much in their daily, you know, someone who, me coming from an office job working in a law firm, yeah, that affected me emotionally, but in a radically different way from how, you know, being able to have conversations about work makes me reflect on like me as a human, basically, like getting down to the most fundamental core of it. And I think that's an important thing to preserve.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's so special about like this sisterhood of like women designers that we've formed is we can talk about those things versus, I mean, it's not like a black and white situation, but I haven't had any conversations like this with my male peers. And I think it's because we are more open to like sharing those inner worlds of ourselves and like dealing with really personal things in our school projects. And that's like a special thing about this project is it's giving a space for us to do that that's safe and like supported, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what I wanted to do, was be able to open this. And I think even beyond that, I think what is really beautiful about that is we get to experience that, and there's no stigma. I mean, there is stigma about being an emotional woman or whatever in design or life, but despite that, we get to have these conversations, and then to normalize that and let everyone, regardless of their gender, their race, their culture, their background, be able to be okay having those things and those conversations in the future. Like my utopia is a world in which, you know, we can have classes or conversations with all of our classmates and feel free and open to bitch and complain and be happy and love and to say the word love and to be just completely open and have a lot of these like social norms and filters kind of removed. And maybe that's a bit of a utopian goal for a small project about women in graphic design and art, but I think that's one that's worth trying to fight for.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, I have to acknowledge the fact that CalArts is uniquely more like what we're describing than not, like compared to other graphic design programs that like, at least I was looking at for grad school. Like they felt really cold and like, I don't know, sad.
They did. They felt sterile.
Oh yeah, perfect word. So I have to acknowledge the fact that at least CalArts is like steps ahead from in that way.
Yeah. And maybe that's a bit harsh. If you, maybe like, maybe not sterile, but technically focused, less warm because we're in California and we have the sunshine.
Yeah, we're a little biased, but I just, being from California and then looking at other schools, I was like, it felt too cold. Literally, emotionally, I was like, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's hard when you have two people from California and one person from Hawaii. We're gonna have some
wins.
Major West Coast bias happening right now.
But I think it is true, and I am like, despite everyone's gonna have some sort of hardship in grad school, but I am incredibly fortunate and lucky and so happy to celebrate being part of this ongoing tradition of CalArts. Having, this incredible feminist movement, even if it existed in the 70s and isn't talked about a ton, I think, and just to talk a little bit more about what I'm envisioning Womenhouse to be, part of it is I do want to have research-based work that talks about what did exist at CalArts and what is our history and our past and what is our lineage. What are we inheriting as kind of the daughters of this tradition of feminist art that, a lot of work was already done for us. It's just either lost or forgotten or not talked about. I didn't learn about, Womanhouse until I was in college, and I've been a female artist in California my entire life. So being able to bring pieces of that history back and discuss them and to tell, other, I don't know, I certainly had no self-confidence as an artist or designer until recently, and that's something I'm going to be working on forever, but to tell other young women, like, you have a history, you have a place here, you've always had a place here, and, that's, it's okay, it's wonderful, it's to be celebrated, is something that's really important. So I think that's going to be another component of
Love that.
These salons.
Yeah.
Well, one of these salon happenings, whatever you want to call them, it would be fun to like do our nails like as if we're in a salon. And then talk about feminism, obviously, too.
Yes, very similar to our previous conversation we had about femininity that we worked on a project on together. Yeah, I think, and as I talked about before, there's a few things that I want to come out of this that are important to share. So the original Womanhouse was an exhibition space in Los Angeles, and ideally, obviously now this video is a cultural artifact that hopefully we can look back on in decades. I don't know the state of the internet if we're going to have an apocalypse before then. But ideally, a historical object. We do live in this pandemic in 2021, which is why we're doing this on Zoom instead of being in a literal space on campus, hanging out, talking. And what I envision is I do want to have some sort of permanent exhibition space for work that is on gender and sexuality and emotions and all of those things, something that is intersectional and inclusive to everyone. And that's what I'm envisioning. And I'm also envisioning to have a website where different writers can, have their criticism and critique and discussions of these issues. And there will be an accompanying Instagram page where we highlight femme artists who are working on incredible things. So that's
sounds amazing.
Yeah, that is to be expected. What is to come?
Yay.
Very exciting.
Yeah. So do either of you have parting comments, wisdom, advice, hopes, dreams for the future?
I mean, obviously I hope this continues, and I do wonder, Womenhouse, you alluded to this already, Katie, Womenhouse in the 70s, the purpose of that and the methodology they used, how does that translate to now? I'm really curious to see how that ends up working out.
Yeah, and how we can evolve it into a new being too. like
Mhm.
honoring that past, but how can we take it like another level further for the time that we live in now?
Totally.
Yeah. And I think the two parts of that that are important are accessibility, which in some ways, us being all on Zoom is still really wonderful because we can connect with students from other schools and have other conversations that otherwise, you know, we wouldn't be able to be physically present for. And the second part of that is just inclusivity, acknowledging that we all live intersectional identities with the different parts of ourselves that, you know, are interacting, and how those narratives individually are really important. So including as many voices as possible in the work that we're creating and promoting and producing. So yeah, I mean, I will do my best to continue this. That is what I'm most excited for in grad school. But yeah, it's going to be a very exciting project, and I'm very thankful for both of you for being here at our inaugural conversation.
Yay.
Happy to be here.
Yes.
Well, cool. So thanks so much, and more to come.
So many more.
Many more.